Welcome to Monarchist Minute. I'm Victor Smith, and on behalf of all of us on this panel and every one of us on the Council and leadership of the Monarchists of America, I would like to wish all of you a very happy Independence Day, and to our Canadian brethren, a very happy Canada Day for those of you listening live in our Discord server right now.
And for those of you who are in Canada, we like to wish half of you the reason you're there, because a lot of formerly Americans had to go to Canada after the unpleasantness. So congratulations on being in Canada for that reason. We're sorry we left you to the healthcare system.
So let me continue on, I should say, with a little bit of a story time. My own ancestry dates back in this country to said American Revolution. We were a prominent family in the state of Maryland, and we held a lot of land and a historic manor house. The head of a family was a lawyer, and it was very hard to be a lawyer in those days, especially if you were a colonist. He had a debate with Charles Carroll of Carrollton, so the story goes, in London in 1774. This man also wrote a treatise against the Stamp Act, which was one of the so-called intolerable acts which led to the revolution. However, when it came time to come to blows about the future of this nation, my ancestor decided to become a redcoat and be a loyalist and have loyalist sympathies. Because of this, our property was seized by the post-revolutionary state government of Maryland. Some of our people, as Charles said, went to Canada. I know of one branch that went to London. My branch stuck around. And I've been in the Baltimore, D.C. area for this whole time, which gives me some pause to reflect on the revolution, and I am going to immediately fill out your bingo card by mentioning the Jacobites.
Wait, that's only filling out the bingo card if I mention the Jacobites. Which I just did. So,
yes. Technically today I mentioned them first.
Yes, but we were
well,
recording
you did not mention them on air, Christoph. You did not mention them on air. So the question, the ultimate question that I think most people of the Jacobite persuasion would have is the following. Is it lawful or legitimate for there to be a revolution against an illegitimate monarch?
All right. Well,
no.
I guess, yeah. I mean, do you want to start off, Darth, or do you want to...
I mean, I'm just going to say never endorse any liberal or Marxist revolution, even if it's overthrowing a illegitimate monarchy. In the future people.
You were a little choppy. What was that last sentence?
You introduce the zeitgeist. Anything can be, any government can be disassembled, reinterpreted, essentially destruction, constant deconstruction of everything.
Well, I guess as resident Jacobite here, the position on the American... Huh?
The resident Jacobite? I was under the impression that it was,
Well, okay. as the resident Jacobite on this podcast who is the most outspoken about it. Okay, really, we all know that there's a secret neo-Jacobite society, underground society, that has been plotting to overthrow the Anglosphere since 1937, and we're only 2 years away from launch day. Oh, I said the quiet part out loud. No, I'm joking. Anyways, no. As resident regular Jacobite here, when it comes to the specific context of the American Revolution, I had to remember the old adage. I think it was a comedian that Abraham Lincoln said, or Abraham Lincoln asked about the question as he was going to Washington, and the whole Confederate business was starting, and he asked what his opinion on the matter was, and the comedian said, "Well, if secession be valid, my thoughts have to lie with the Confederacy. If secession not be valid, then God save the king." Um, I mean, either way, the United States was on the wrong in either one or both of those conflicts. Do I like the Hanoverians? Not particularly. But of the Hanoverians, specifically, Before eventually it switched to a different house with Queen Victoria, I think. Geordie,
Queen
good
Victoria.
old Victoria. I said Queen Victoria, didn't I?
You said Queen Victoria. You said when Queen Victoria
Oh dear.
started. I believe you meant to say after Queen Victoria died.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, okay. I don't know. Anyways, so, I can speak. No, okay. So, George III, I think, is probably the only one of the Hanoverians that I could affectionately call Geordie, as opposed to the other two who I'd be calling Geordie in somewhat of a, not necessarily derogative sense, but, it's just,
Right.
but George III, in a lot of ways, he was essentially a Jacobite without the conviction, because he believed that the monarch should actually be able to rule as well as reign. It's just he wasn't. He wasn't as convicted enough to say that Parliament was wrong for overthrowing the Stuarts or overthrowing James II, because otherwise he would have stepped down and put Bonnie Prince Charlie on the throne. But anyways, but the ultimate question is, the British monarchy, the throne itself was, even though it was being occupied by someone who wasn't exactly lawful, the throne itself was a more valid institution and had more rights than the Continental Congress, which was made up of a bunch of colonial oligarchs who wanted to secure power for themselves rather than let London have any influence on matters. They had no authority whatsoever. I mean, it would essentially be, imagine all the Great Lakes states, the governors of all the Great Lakes states coming together and saying, you know what, we don't like Washington's diktats. Well, not the governors. A bunch of rich people from the Great Lakes states and influential people, some of them, maybe former colonial well, not colonial, some of them former governors, some of them state congressmen, but a lot of rich people coming together and saying, you know what, we don't particularly care for you guys in Washington, and we've declared ourselves the government. How legitimate does that seem to you? And yet we are the product of that very same thing.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying?
I completely understand.
Yeah, Christoph, you can talk now.
Well, the question was, is it legitimate? And instead of offering an opinion like the rest of my colleagues here have, we have to look to what the Jacobites actually did when they settled in the state of North and South Carolina, and some of them upperly in Pennsylvania. When they settled here, and then, after the War of Regulation passed, and they fought in the War of Independence, most of them fought for Geordie. In fact, according to William Gaston, whose father was a patriot from England, he said the most people he had fought in North Carolina were Scots. directly from Scotland. In fact, most of the Scottish population in North Carolina up until the Civil War still spoke Gaelic. Majority Jacobite, majority Scottish. All of them fought for Geordie. So, I mean, is there really any debate there if all of them unanimously thought that the Republican government would have been a terrible idea? It was a spit in the face of all the institutions that they had sought to preserve in 45. It's a spit in the face of what they had come to do in Carolina, preserving the empire, but also preserving their livelihood as British subjects, while still being away from, the Hanoverians.
And that is also an interesting side note. Besides, we know of famous Catholic rebs in the war, although that's more of a Civil War term. But I don't know. I like the way that sounds, rebs, of rebels in the Revolution who were Catholic. But the rank and file of the British, of the Catholic population of the colonies, they were all they were mostly loyalists, down to the man almost. And in fact, I think there were 3 or 4 Catholic regiments who were around, and I don't think that includes any of them from Quebec. And just ask the people of Quebec who they sided with during the Revolution, because I'll tell you, it wasn't the Continental Congress. And so no big surprises for who they no prizes there for who they actually sided with. But the fact of the matter is that this was during the penal laws. All the laws, they weren't being. I don't think they were being enforced with the same severity as they were as under like Cromwell's reign or Elizabeth I. But it wasn't a good time to be a Catholic in the Anglosphere. And yet these people were sticking, our Catholic forefathers were sticking with the Hanoverians, or at least the British, over the colonists. And maybe that has something to do with people who were concerned that, I can't remember which founding father it was. It's not one of the major ones, the 3 that you're required to know in school these days. But it was one of the founding fathers who was concerned that the king, who was an Anglican, was by granting the Quebecois their right to practice the Catholic faith, he was somehow concerned that he was going to spread papistry as far south as New York. I mean, maybe he was seeing something that we don't. Maybe there was maybe the king was seriously considering converting to Catholicism,
If
and
only
we
he
have
was.
that record lost to time. I doubt it. Huh?
If only he was.
If only he was. But apparently the revolution actually soured King George's opinion on Catholics. For whatever reason, maybe it was the French and the Spanish support, but apparently King George III was actually a little more lenient on Catholicism early in his reign, although he refused to assent to a law that would have loosened the restrictions on Catholics. He essentially delayed Catholic emancipation. I think it was George IV where that started in earnest.
It was, yeah.
But because he thought it violated his oath, which of course was an illegitimate oath anyways, because any oath against the Catholic faith. Well, anyways, yeah. But I mean, at least he did it for on the surface honorable reason, unlike our politicians who, Anyways, so Catholics supported the crown. The Jacobites supported the crown. Benjamin Franklin's son supported the crown, which is kind of funny.
And of course, Anglicans, like my ancestors, supported the crown.
Yeah, well, I mean that's a thing too. I think it was Thomas Jefferson, or maybe it was Benjamin Franklin. But after the Revolution, I think it was Thomas Jefferson. He said something like, "I believe that he said that he believed within 40 years everybody in this country would be Unitarian." I mean, they were, and that's what happens when you get Puritans and they start to fall apart. You get Unitarians. I mean, they're like they're Puritans without the no, they're not even that. They're I don't know how you would describe a Unitarian.
We don't need to. We're talking
Apparently,
about
there's basically
Independence Day.
Unitarian. Yeah, we'll go back to talking about Independence Day, but I don't know. The Unitarian thing is just like apparently there's like European Unitarians, because apparently Calvinism follows the same trend everywhere, where it will eventually decay into what is essentially Unitarianism, and apparently, but in some of like the more Eastern Protestant joints, there's Unitarianism, but with bishops. I mean, obviously they're not valid bishops, of course, but like, why?
Yeah, it gets weird. Like High Church Lutheranism does that, and like the King of Prussia got coronated by a Lutheran bishop, even though it sounds like an oxymoron.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know exactly.
Just wanted to comment.
I know. Here's what I think. I used to have this question in my head as to exactly when the Anglicans lost their apostolic succession. But apparently, reading through my copy of the Dezinger, I can't remember exactly where, and this is completely off topic, and we'll get back to topic soon. The reason why the Anglicans lost their apostolic succession was because they didn't use the proper words of the form for a while when they were consecrating, when they were ordaining priests. I think it was, don't quote me on this, but it was the part where they didn't mention the fact that the priest's job was to have a sacrifice for the living and the dead. It may have been another section, but because they didn't use the form of the sacrament, the matter and the intent wouldn't matter, because in order to have a valid sacrament, at least from my understanding, you need you need the matter, the form, and the intention. And I think the Council of Florence defined that. But anyways, so because the Anglicans for a while didn't use the proper form, their apostolic succession died, and all the last of the actual bishops eventually died, and then there were no bishops to consecrate priests. And so even though later on the Anglicans may have reintroduced that, and you had the Anglo-Catholics who think they're priests, that's why they're not. Even though theologically speaking, on everything else, you have high Anglo-Catholics who are papalists who agree with the Pope on everything. It's just that they can't get over the fact they don't have valid apostolic succession. Anyways, I don't know what this has to do with Independence Day, but it was a worthwhile diversion. Do we want to talk?
Let's head back to.
So should we celebrate Independence Day? I guess is the question.
Let's first, because we were talking about the Jacobites and Carolina, let's talk about the big movement in Carolina called the Regulator Movement with our resident North Carolinian, Christoph Biller. Go ahead.
All right. So, yes, Victor was right. I am the resident North Carolinian here, and I think one of only 2 North Carolinians in this entire server. The Regulator Movement was basically... some historians like to call it a precursor to the Revolution, but in all of its entirety, it isn't. And let me explain why. So everything, just like the Revolution, which is why they've come to this conclusion, it was caused over taxes and corruption. So the governor of North Carolina, William Tryon, wanted to build a very lavish palace, very, very lavish palace. But a couple North Carolinians, and there was even a Regulator Movement in South Carolina, but we're not going to get into that, they were very displeased over the fact that they were paying for this lovely palace called Tryon Palace now. So they did rise up against His Majesty's officials, but never did the Regulator Movement ever in any way display any intent to off-put the monarchy. They never had any messages against His Majesty the King George, nor did they have any offsetting messages against Britain, because they were mostly British people, ethnically or literally 1 or 2 generation immigrants who had just came in. North Carolina at this time was mostly uninhabited except for very old towns like Bath, Elizabethtown, off to the west. So all of these basically still British people, because they were raised by people who were born in Britain, rising up against a governor who is charging them outrageous amounts of taxes because they don't like William Tryon, but they like His Majesty the King George. And these are mostly Jacobites. These are people who know what they're doing when it comes to warfare, when it comes to standing up to their government.
Well, some of them spent a lot of time at Ardmore prison.
So, our very good Jacobite friends here in North Carolina, they knew their morals. They knew they didn't like taxes, but they knew that overall, that Britain wasn't so bad.
Better than the alternative.
Better than a federal government that
You
puts
think-
chains on your people. Yes, I agree.
I think you were going to say something else, Christoph, but then you got cut off.
Not really.
Oh, okay.
So I guess the question of should we celebrate Independence Day is an interesting one. I guess Vic, do you wanna have your crack at answering that question?
Well, I think it's, especially for an American monarchist, it is a personal decision that each one of us has to make individually. Now, considering my own ancestry, I might decline to do it, but there are very good arguments for why you should do it. Not the least of which is love of country. And I believe a saint said that your country is your mother and you love your mother. Therefore, you love your country. So it is, so celebrating Independence Day, I think, is part and parcel of being an American, but I completely understand why some people would choose not to celebrate it, especially people like me who have ancestors who actually fought for the British Crown, or whose sympathies lied with the British Crown.
I mean, okay. I should stop saying I mean. Okay. My position is a little more. I mean, the fact is that America, like it or not, is a nation and a people. And would I be necessarily opposed to a glorious Catholic Anglosphere? Not necessarily. But the fact remains is right now America is a people, and we have our own history, and we have our own culture. Now, our culture may not be the best, and we may not, and the circumstances in which we became a people are not necessarily great. We didn't become a people as the last best hope of monarchist kind, saving the crown from a revolution across the sea in England. We did the exact opposite. We created a revolution that tried to overthrow the government, and we succeeded, at least in our neck of the woods, and we crushed royal authority, any lingering vestiges of royal authority in England, without actually, coming into London. So yay us for managing to do that without technically firing a shot in London. I don't know. Anyways, but the fact remains. The fact remains is that we are a people. But celebrating July 4th as it is now, I think for us is out of the question, because what we're celebrating is the legacy of the founding fathers. And I don't think that we as American monarchists in any way should cast off the founding fathers as part of the national ethos as heroes to look up to. Take from them any legitimately good ideas they may have had. Take from them take from them any actual good ideas that they had. But really, they're just men in history at that point. If anything, they're more antagonists in history at that point. In the story of the American monarchist, they are not. They are not necessarily. They're not really the heroes of the story. So celebrating July 4th as a testament to what they did, and being like, "Yay, they did!" They did this. I mean, I think that's out of the question. However, having a day to celebrate the fact that we Americans are a people and that we are really a nation, that is, I think that's good. But celebrating the founding fathers and all the other customary things that come along with July 4th, I don't necessarily think is good. So, I mean, we can keep the day, but the actual holiday, well, it's not really a holiday because it's not a holy day, but the actual day itself and what it what it stands for right now is out of the question.
We should just really call it a federal day, just instead of a holiday. I don't know. Random thought. What I miss? I'm sorry.
Well, we went over the Regulator Movement a little bit, and then we're now asking the question as to whether or not we should celebrate the 4th of July at all. Vic took the stance that it's up to you as a monarchist. I took the stance that we shouldn't be celebrating it in its current form because it's celebrating the legacy of people who were essentially just a bunch of who had a bunch of Masonic ideas and who essentially started the course the country is on. But celebrating Independence Day but having a date to celebrate the fact that we are a people would be kind of cool. But keep the hamburgers.
We can treat it like how Russia treats VE Day, because technically that was the Soviet communist regime that the modern Russian hates, but they don't hate their ancestors that fought in the war. They still love them, and they'll still parade around Soviet iconography, but not in a celebration of the communist system, but in a celebration of fending off the invading Germans. So, I mean, that's kind of like my stance that we kind of have to take, because we have to accept the fact that we had a Republican past if we installed a truly traditional monarchical system, and just kind of get over it and accept it.
I mean, and the thing is taking the imagery of the Republic. There is a lot of how do I describe this? There's a lot of imagery. There's actually a lot of artwork and such from the time of the Republic. Well, we're still in the time of the Republic, unfortunately. But a lot of that, is but a lot of it is good. Now, some of it needs to be removed ASAP, like the whole weird obsession that the founding fathers had with portraying, or well, not necessarily the founding fathers, but portraying George Washington as among the Greek pantheon. One, they don't one they either don't exist or they're demons, so no. Secondly, let's see, what's the song? Was it Hail Columbia? Where it's where they claim that Washington had godlike power. Okay, Washington was he's probably the founding father that I think most people can agree was at least somewhat tolerable, and there is evidence to suggest the fact that he died a Catholic, which would have been
and that the Blessed Mother appeared to him at Valley Forge.
The evidence of that is very circumstantial.
Well, that hasn't been confirmed, but by the church hierarchy, at least as far as my to my knowledge. But
he claimed that he saw an angel, and I mean, Freemasons will use sacred iconography to their own advantage all the time. So if they can say that the American project is divinely inspired, it's a way to get especially American Puritans on board.
I don't know, but with Washington specifically, I do like to hold out hope that he did for the sake of his soul, that he did die a Catholic. But I mean, we won't know this side of the grave. But yeah. And now we have a temporary guest to probably counter argument my position, maybe.
Hello.
Hello, Cushion Undying.
Right. Yeah. So that's pretty much on the money of what I'm here to do.
Uh-oh.
Look, okay.
Uh-oh.
About the founding of the country, not about the form of government specifically. And I think the idea of like, okay, like I think I can almost sort of understand where you're coming from to an extent, but I think the idea of like, to say, oh well, certainly we can't in its current form, right? I think that sort of almost plays into this idea that to be a monarchist means you have to believe every monarchy is always good, every republic is always bad, no matter what, like end of story, period, like completely, like the most two-dimensional analysis you could possibly, it's essentially a caricature of a monarchist. Like that's what I would imagine somebody who is not a monarchist would portray a monarchist as being like.
I kind of agree with him there that Charles, you did make a one-sided point. You can be American monarchist and not be a loyalist to the British Crown.
Well, I understand that. I think
I mean,
but I mean,
go ahead.
I mean the caricature thing. I mean, I guess maybe it sounds like that, and I guess maybe to a certain extent I believe that. But I also do believe that legitimately what George III wanted and what was Britain in 1776 was better than the republic we got out of it. The whole thing about taxes, how it's like no taxation without representation. We were paying higher taxes afterwards.
But it was about representation, not about the amount. That's the thing.
Well,
I mean, the thing is, like, at the end of the day, I mean, and this is the thing that I think often gets overlooked on this subject. The main issue was Parliament, not the king. The problem with the king was that he sided with Parliament against the American colonists, who the Parliament were not treating as proper British citizens, because all English or I can't remember if it's British or English, I imagine it's British, citizens had the right to not be taxed through that representation. The Parliament essentially said, well, we don't care about that.
I mean,
the colonists tried to get a situation like what Canada has, or any other country in the Commonwealth, of having our own Parliament, but still being under King George III. And King George III said, no, you guys are going to listen to what the Parliament says.
I mean,
so that kind of means there's only one way out.
I think that's fair, but at the end, but there was still a discussion before the revolution going on as to what that was, and I don't think that the colonists should have been necessarily being taxed, but I also think that this unique situation where the colonies had rights and privileges that other regions of England didn't. It's not like legally speaking, it wasn't the only difference between North Carolina and Northumberland was the fact that North Carolina didn't have seats in Parliament. It was just, I mean, the North Carolina, like any other colony, because by its charter, had special rights and privileges, and I don't think Parliament should have been anything to do with it. But I don't think that in of itself was justification for a revolt against the entire system.
Except, the colonies had their own governments. They governed themselves. In fact, in the fundamental constitutions of Carolina, which was written by John Locke, ironically. We're given nearly complete autonomy under the Lords Proprietor. And we can levy our own taxes as we so please. We have our own assembly, which includes the Lords Proprietor, Lord Spiritual, and Temporal, and then a House of Commons. It's all very contrarian that we were representing ourselves in our governments, but we wanted representation from Britain. I know this is a very terrible thing to say right now, but it's almost like the federal tax that we are having to endure as American citizens right now. So,
I mean, oh, go on.
I also, I don't think the
I mean,
argument
we
on
do
that
have representatives
works
in the
completely,
federal government.
because some of the most anti-monarchists. Well, no, but I mean, in terms of like,
We were also taxing ourselves
what we got out of
alongside
it.
Britain.
Well, some of the most anti-monarchist members. Yeah, I know, but that wasn't the. Whatever. Am I cutting in and out?
Kinda, yeah. I mean, I guess here's what I'll say. I do agree with you that the biggest problem when it came to the revolution was Parliament. But at the same time, in of itself, okay, we have to take into account just war theory. Was the burden of parliamentary taxes, which, mind you, they're not as a percentage the same as our federal tax. You know, we're not, as a percentage, the colonists were paying much less in tax to, well, basically anybody than we are paying to the federal government
You are
alone.
very correct.
I think I'm correct in that assumption, even though I don't have the math in front of me. But yeah. So, but was
Modern
the
comparisons are.
well, no. Here. So, was the evil of unjust tax imposed by Parliament, was that a greater evil than all the bloodshed, all the violence, all the destruction of property incurred, and the increase in taxes, mind you, after the war,
Well, I don't
that
agree
was
that.
caused by the revolution? Because in order for a
I
war
don't
to be
agree that
just,
increased taxes is an inherent evil.
well, no. I
But
mean, I'm not saying increased taxes was an inherent evil, but when your justification, part of your justification for rebelling is you think the taxes are burdensome.
well, no, but it wasn't. Again, that's you're conflating. It's conflating. You know, I don't like how much I'm being taxed with I have no say in how much I'm being taxed. The ancient world's concept of liberty was very much having input over the system, not being left alone by the government. You know.
Okay. Well, I mean, I guess point taken. But still, does okay, because in order for any sort of war, or I guess rebellion, to be just, it has to meet several criteria. And I don't think that this would in any way justify that the violence that was going to happen because of the Declaration of Independence would in any way justify the increase in taxes, because the situation could have changed. George III wanted to exercise more power, and he had ruled in several colonial cases, and he was clearly, and I think that he had taken an interest in colonial affairs. There were like a bunch of Baptists or whatever who were making trouble for the Indians, and the Indians appealed to the king, and the king's like, yeah, could you maybe like stop messing with them? And there were times when the colonial governors were imposing taxes on the people, and the people thought they were unjustified because they also didn't have representation in their state legislatures. Not every colonial had representation in his legislature, and the king was like, yeah. So I don't think that inherently George III's I don't think that inherently the tax itself and the issue of the tax was a justification for all the death that resulted, especially considering that that even though it wasn't necessarily de jure, there was nothing saying that, given the monarch they had at the time and given his sentiments, that the situation couldn't have improved if the colonists had simply started to, rather than start to get all was it confrontational, started to act more in a was it negotiational, is that an adjective, negotiational way with the parliament and the king, trying to work out some sort of deal, as opposed to going all up in arms, which I'm not saying they weren't, but I don't think my point is to say it in a sentence is that I don't think that the violence was justified by their justification for the violence doesn't cut it.
Of course, if you wanted out of the country, of course, I think I would imagine my own ancestor was at least part of that discussion, at least in Maryland. I imagine my own ancestor was at least part of that discussion and debate, although I don't believe we have any record of any debate happening. He did, for those of you that may have missed it, he did oppose the Stamp Act. He would have treatise against it. But then when it came time to revolt, decided to be a loyalist.
Yeah.
So I would imagine that he was at least part of that, in Maryland at least.
Look, I'm just saying, right? I get why there might be like personal reservations or whatever, but I think to say, I think to make like the movement itself, or to paint the movement itself as being opposed to it, is well, I mean, among other things, just a bad idea.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I would agree with that, because I don't think you would be able to win any American hearts and minds by opposing the celebration of the signing of a Declaration of Independence.
And yeah, that's going to be a great slogan. Is I think our country shouldn't have been founded. Please vote for me.
Well, I mean, it's not so much. I mean, that's. I mean, that's sort of like saying I don't think that what do you say? I don't think that Gaul should have tried to become its own independent entity and become France after the Roman Empire started to crumble. Although it wasn't as simple as that, because the whole mess
Well,
that.
Rome collapsed, so that's
Well, yeah.
irrelevant.
Okay. Let me find a different example. I mean, that's sort of. I mean, that'd be akin to saying a Spanish monarch or a Mexican monarchist saying, "I don't think we should have broken away from Mexico." I mean, a Mexican monarchist saying we shouldn't have broken away from Mexico. A Mexican monarchist saying we shouldn't have
Spain.
broken away from Spain. Please, I mean, vote for me so we can build something better out of it. Because I mean, we're left with the situation that we're given, and we had to make the best of the situation than we were given.
Right. I get what you mean, but nobody's going to want to hear that. Like, if nothing else, you just have to be realistic. Like, that's not a good message.
Well, I mean, I guess I had to be realistic, but at the same time, I can't change what I believe just because it will sound better.
Sure, but I mean, like, what I'm just saying is, like, that definitely should not in any way be portrayed as, like, the overall movement's view on it.
Well, yeah, I'm not saying it. I mean, I did preface this by saying that, in my view, or something like that. But I mean, I guess I could see your point, but I don't know. I mean, there's just the whole thing, the whole deal was a bad business. I mean, the Independence Day resulted in the revolution, or the war, and a lot of people died in that war, and what we got out of it in the short term and arguably in the long term was not necessarily the best result for either us or the British, because like I said, the revolution
I actually,
corroded the royal
I actually,
authority.
I actually think that in terms of our nation, the revolution actually was a great thing, because if we didn't, if we never ended up revolting, I don't think we'd be a superpower today.
Well, yeah, but I mean,
I have to go
okay,
back to work, so I got to
okay,
leave the chat.
okay. Take care, God bless. Okay, well, okay. I mean, there's an issue of us being a superpower, which I mean, yay, America has a lot of global influence. But what are we using that influence for? Does us being a united, does America having its current borders and the current history that it does, has that made the world a better place? And that's a little difficult of a question to answer, because right now, we don't know what. Okay, realistically speaking, we can hypothesize all we want about what would have happened had the colonists tried to come to some sort of agreement. I think there's even a book talking about, what the American Revolution never happened and America and Britain get along and whatnot. But an alternate history book, obviously. But the fact remains is that America's independence had a massive impact on the rest of the world, and our influence affected Latin America. Our influence affected this, that, and the other. And we'll never know whether or not ultimately us becoming independent would be a better outcome. I mean, right now, at least for me, it doesn't look like it. But at the same time, and I want to stress this because it's making me sound like I hate this country, which I don't. The fact remains is that should we have become an independent entity? No. But we are, and we right now have 50 states, a couple of territories, and some more overseas territory and whatnot. And, our empire across the seas is nothing like the British, or was nothing like the British, is kind of gone now. But it's all one country, for better or worse. And this is my land, and because of history, California is as much my inheritance as Michigan, even though in 1776 Michigan was British and an Indian reservation, and California was Spanish. And you know
Do you
what?
mean Michigan? Don't you mean Michigan was
Michigan was British.
French?
No, Michigan. Well, it was part of the province of Quebec. Technically, I think Michigan was part of the province of Quebec, but Quebec was still owned by the British in 1776. The French
Ah,
didn't have any mainland colonial possessions left by that point, and they wouldn't get Louisiana back until Napoleon forced the Span. Anyways, long story, which I love to tell, but not right now. So you know what? This is my country, and for better or worse, it's here, and it's my job as one of her sons to love her and to see that she has the best future possible. And so that doesn't. And so uh, I mean, the circumstances in which we became a people aren't necessarily the most pleasant, but we are, and we have a shared history. And it's our obligation to see that the next generation, when they look at the history books, it'll be a little bit brighter. And, maybe ultimately in 100 years, that'll mean American monarchy. And in 200 years, it'll mean a glorious Jacobite Anglosphere. I don't know. Um, but, but we're a people now. We're a land. We have territory. California is as much as our territory, just as much as New York is. And that's worth preserving. Whatever
of course,
direction this country takes.
of course, our other person, Darth, considers himself an expat, so he is not going to celebrate the revolution under any circumstances.
Well, I mean, we should probably let him speak to the context of that, but no, I mean, the fact remains is that whatever happens to this country, Should we have become independent? Should we have acquired all this land that was formerly French and formerly Spanish and formerly Indian or Russian or whatever? All that right now, we could talk about that, but right now that's irrelevant because it's all here. And whatever happens to this land, it all has to go together. I don't want California to become its own separate thing. We may joke about, ejecting California from the Union so that it can mess itself up. But but really the future of the future of Michigan and the future of California and the future of New York and the future of Louisiana, it's all together. At least that's the way it should be. Maybe that means
If you ask certain members of the Republican Party in Texas, they want to secede from the Union, so...
Well, no. I'm sorry, Texas. You joined this union. You signed up. You got in. You joined this union. You're stuck with it. Okay. And I mean, and that, and of course, that always brings us back to the question if secession, is secession valid or not? I mean, whether it's valid or not right now is irrelevant. It's just that I don't want it to happen. I mean, whether or not the Confederate secession in 1861 was legitimate or not is beside the point. I mean, maybe I would have stood by in the end, and not taken up arms to put down the Confederacy. I would have tried to, get slavery gone, obviously, but the idea of a separate Confederate states, I don't know if militarily, morally, I could oppose that, given the circumstances of the American Revolution. But I would have fought tooth and nail verbally and done everything up to a certain point to keep them in, because we are a union. I mean, that's our I mean, North Carolina and Florida and Louisiana, they're in this union, and I don't want them to leave. I wouldn't have wanted them to leave. I still don't want them to leave, and I don't want Michigan to leave. And if for whatever reason I find myself supporting the position in the future where I want groups to leave, it would be because us staying in the union would be in every conceivable way the wrong choice. And I would want us to eventually return to the union once it fixed itself. But I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm being a little long-winded here, and I should let Vic speak soon. But I just, for better or worse, we're here, is what I'm saying. And this land, all 50 states, all the territories, it's our land, it's our inheritance. It's a single land and a single people because of history, and that history may not have been pretty, but we're here. This is our country. You gotta love it. You have to love it. I have to love it, and I'm okay with that. Flaws and all, this is my country, and I love it. So there. I don't know why I sounded like say that in an argumentative tone.
Well, and I think that because it's just the two of us, and there isn't really anything more to add, I suppose we could, oh,
What?
Darth is back.
I can come back for a little bit. To expound on the expat in my own country, it is essentially the mental space you need to be in to combat the evils you see before you. If your regime that you have over you is fundamentally evil, you are an expat in your own nation because it is going to do everything to go against you, to alienate you. So you might as well just mentally make that sound so that way you can lead yourself towards something greater, towards something that you truly believe in, even if that goes against the grain of society, which that makes you an expat in your own country.
Great, thank you for that. I suppose we can call it a closing reflection. And I think that Charles summed it up very beautifully. We may be 50 states, but we are one nation, and sort of some would argue we are not one people because some Americans are very, shall we, because there were, I lost my train of thought. I
Different
apologize.
ethnicities.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, here's the thing with that. Okay, it's good to be proud of where your family came from. You know, I'm part Slovak. I mentioned that before. I'm part German. I think I'm also from a colonel, from an uncle colonel, English, Scottish, Welsh, and Irish all in one, and he married into the Dutch part of the family. But you know, I'm essentially all the Western Indo-European ethnicities thrown together. I mean, I haven't confirmed that, but essentially, but I mean, it wouldn't surprise me. And then plus Slovak, so you got a bit of Eastern European there. But you know, the fact remains is, what other fatherland would I have? You know, because let's assume for a moment that I was 100% German or 100% Slovak. I don't, culturally speaking, even though American culture isn't the fact remains is I was born here. I was raised here. Okay, I'm an American more than I am Slovak or German simply by virtue of that. That doesn't mean I just cast off that history, you know. That doesn't mean that I can't take ideas that my ancestors from the old country had and incorporate them because because glorious Slovak ancestors would probably view our separation of church and state in sort of a what the heck are you guys thinking sort of way. But the fact remains is I'm an American. I don't have another fatherland, and for most of the Americans there, you don't either. You know, unless you're an immigrant, you don't really have any other fatherland you can call your own. And by virtue of the fact that you're an immigrant, you do, or at least you should have a notion that this is a better land for you to be in, and you have an uh, obligation to be there. So, yeah, that's what I had to say about the ethnicity thing. So yeah, Vic, or do you have any closing thoughts?
I had a closing thought, but then somebody joined our server, then immediately left our server.
Mm.
So, and that sort of took my closing thoughts away. So,
I guess it's time to wrap up. So for everybody who's watching this on July 4th, celebrate Independence Day or no, whether you're doing that or not. I hope you guys are all having has some burgers anyways. You know what? If that's one thing we can glean from America's cultural heritage is taking all the value out of a day and only taking the bare surface elements and completely twisting what it is. You know, like what the Puritans did with Christmas. They couldn't destroy it, so they commercialized it. Yeah. So, but have a burger, have some ketchup. Don't have mustard. That's disgusting. What's wrong with you? Uh,
hey,
put some cheese on it, shredded cheddar, Colby Jack, whatever. Some good old fashioned American cheese. Get the grill out unless it's raining, in which case, don't grill in the house. But have a good time. Spend time with your friends and family. Pray for the conversion of this country. And now I will go do the outro thing proper. If you would like to join us live, so you can hear the ramblings firsthand without the ability to skip over them, you can join us on our Discord, where we record these podcasts 8 p.m. Eastern time on Fridays. And you will be able to follow us on Twitter, which some of you who are listening to this might have done, because our William Stout, who created a very excellent meme that Twitter really enjoyed. So that was nice. And you can also follow us on Gab. I'm sorry, I'm not very active over there. We also have a Facebook community, which I still need to get the link to put in the description. And we have an Instagram and a website. So you can follow us there. You can look at us there. You can do all that sort of stuff. Or don't. You made it to the end of this video, so I think you really should, though. So with that, we will just the final thing to pray for America. But anyways, now we will conclude in prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven.
Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil.
Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen. So until next week, you fellow Yankee-Doodle-Dandies, and Dixies, because apparently Southerners don't like to be called Yankee-Doodle-Dandies, may God bless you, and may God bless the United States of America.